They are meant for a different generation than
Yeah.
us.
Blind. I don't even know if I'm live.
It seems to be working.
Well, I don't know. I mean, yeah. Well, I look my best on the camera, though. I mean, I think your camera is bringing out, the beauty that's inside the soul.
Oh.
No, look at mine. I'm all red. I think I need the light, but I don't want to touch this light now. Yo. Yeah, fucking darkness, man. You're mysterious.
All right, come on. Let's talk about what we came here to talk about.
No.
So we came here to talk about the Western Cape.
No. Yesterday,
Yeah.
I saw the post around someone calling for Western Cape to not be part of South Africa.
Okay.
And I think every sort of 2 years I see a post like that from one group of the other.
Mm.
There was one group in 2018 who was like, yeah, we want to secede. And there's a whole...
Using big English, what's secede?
Secede, I want to get out of South Africa.
We want to pull it Orania.
Well, I mean, I don't think they want to pull Orania. I think Orania is kind of understood its place. But they say they want to be a country.
Okay, all right.
And you know what? I've been alive for at least 3 decades. Hey, being a country can be a serious thing. Eh?
Okay,
So can Western Cape really leave? I mean, what do you think? Do you want it to go? What's your experience of Western Cape? Because I'm not got mixed feelings. We'll take up.
Okay. So let's first talk about, have you been to the Western Cape? Have you been to Cape Town?
You know what? To be honest, the answer is yes. But given how much of a traveler I am, I've only been there 3 times. And to be honest, I've never really experienced Cape Town, let alone the Western Cape. I've always gone there in a controlled fashion. Let me put it like that. I've never gone wild in the Western Cape. Really had fun in Cape Town. It's just always controlled and contrived. And my experiences almost seemed curated. So I'm not really sure if I like it. But what I read on the news, what I hear from people's anecdotes, I'm kind of nervous about the Western Cape.
So, first time I went to Cape Town, I came back feeling like they were already a different country. So my experience of it was, I think it was Sea Point. I think it was Sea Point we were staying. We rented an apartment there and we were staying there. Strange enough, some of the restaurants around there would have like we are busy, we are too full, private event. That kind of set up where you are just being told that you're not welcome here.
Yeah, but we are too full for you.
Yes.
And I don't understand the Western Cape. I think it's pretty cool, but I'm just like, it's networking.
Okay, so what would they have to do in order to properly what's an English word?
Hey, Joe, Friday, secede.
Secede.
So let's not even complicate it to become an own country.
Yeah.
But I think before we go, I went to Mossel Bay one time with my family, and it was nice. It was really nice.
Okay.
You know that whole sunset at 9 o'clock kind of vibe. I'm like, what the hell? But here's the thing. After a while, I realized everywhere I go with the only black family holidaying. I was nervous. I was like, hey, boy, Western Cape is Charlie. So yeah, I don't think I would want them to go. I think they've got beautiful gems in this country. They certainly have value for South Africa. But these calls, everyone's saying, we need to get out. Yeah, what would they need to do? I mean, that's the question I asked. Okay. I said, what would we need to do?
So let's take it from the first point. Okay, what makes a country a country? Right? If we're talking about seceding, we must first know what makes a country a country. How do you define a country? For you, when you look at the countries in the world, in Africa, what makes a country a country?
I think the challenge is we understand it at a high level. We know that there's sovereignty, this word sovereignty. But without answering your question, there's something underpinning the word. What defines sovereignty? Because that's what they would have to get, sovereignty. Who gives that? I mean, it's bizarre. The world is the body that says, okay, right, guys, we've had your arguments, Cape Town, you are free. Or it's kind of like, who? What is sovereignty and who gives it? Okay. I don't know. I mean, we don't want to get religious. Is it God? I mean, who gives that stuff?
Right. So if anyone who's watching knows what makes a country, put it in the comments there. Let's see if you know what makes a country a country. Right. What's a condition that makes something a country? right? And while people are answering, let me ask you another question.
Okay.
Which was the first country ever in the world?
I mean, I wasn't born. I know, I was not born. I was not involved in countries at the time. At the time, I was involved in wherever I was. So I don't know. What's the first country in the world?
It's a trick question, right? So as long as humans have existed, they've sort of gone into geographic areas, collected themselves. But the notion of country is a very new one. It only started in the 1900s. Before then, you had empires. Before then, you had like regions, feudal lords. There wasn't the modern definition.
So an empire is kind of like what? You just conquer people.
Yes.
You find people sitting in the grass. You're like, you guys, that's my grass.
Yes.
And if they say no, you shoot them, and then it's now definitely your grass.
Yeah.
That's how it worked.
So that's exactly how it worked. What kind of happened is that you'd have military strength. So you would consider a region within your control, and then you go conquer other people. And then the conquered are not really part of your country, they are conquered states. Right. And then they pay some sort of taxation or tribute.
Conquered taxation, like, thank you for conquering us. Here's some gold.
Yeah. But they wouldn't form into a definition of country yet, right? In the 1900s, that's where this modern definition of country comes from, right? So country is actually a modern thing. It's a contemporary thing.
But given how savage history is,
yeah.
So the idea of country is at least 100 years old. How many holes do you think are in the definition there?
How many
holes are in the definition? Like, I mean, if it's a 100-year-old concept, could it even be relevant nowadays? The idea of how we form countries.
Yeah. So, that's a trick question.
It is. Because I'm like,
So the oldest country is Japan by administration, because it's easy, it's an island. So they just went from an empire to a country, but same people, right? And then followed by China and then some others. France is also pretty old. And what's the newest country in the world?
Oh, I mean, that's easy. South Sudan.
South Sudan is the newest country.
That's it. Yeah, the baby. So the baby of the world. The baby of Africa, yeah.
So piggybacking off South Sudan, what conditions existed that allowed South Sudan to become a country? So I don't see any answers to our question, so we're going to answer it ourselves. So there's
here's the thing about South Sudan, and this is why, for me, the question comes in. The issue of sovereignty, is it a matter of law or is it a matter of politics? Right? Because, to be honest, if it's a matter of law, don't we just have to get a checklist? We take that checklist, it gets audited, and then we are told, congratulations, you're a new country.
Okay. That's where things are leaning towards, but they're not there yet. What you're asking basically is there's two mindsets to how countries become a country. Both those mindsets have preconditions first, right? So there's a convention that was held in, I can't remember where it was, but it's called like the Montevideo, did I get it right? Montevideo Convention. Part of what was decided there is the legally conditions for a place to be a country.
Okay.
Right? That's the first time it was codified. Before then, it was not codified. You had military strength, you kill people, you're like, I'm a country. They're like, okay, England. Right? But before then, it wasn't codified. So the codification of it, they said, okay, 3 things. Right. Number 1, you must have a defined territory.
Okay.
So you must have some sort of land that you can claim. Okay.
Yeah.
Second thing they said is, okay, you kick that away.
Oh.
They said, okay, you must have a permanent population that's in place. So this is important because in the history of man, a large part of the planet was hunter-gatherers. So you wouldn't consider hunter-gatherers over a space, a country before.
No, that's a bit unfair, though.
Well, who said
we know history is unfair. Okay, so okay.
And the last thing they said is there must be some sort of government that administrates over the territory, right? A central government that has the power to administrate over the territory.
Kind of sounds like a setup, though. Now I'm just like, you decide those rules and then you come and tell people, guys, by the way, you guys are just temporarily moving through here. We are the government. Shut.
So when you listen to those 3 things, it means that anyone who owns a large piece of land can just declare and say, I want to be in the country. The only thing they need to do is get a government, right? But here's a trick. That one is called something like it's when you declare yourself a country.
An independent,
right?
yeah.
But there's another school of thought that says, besides those three things, you also have to be accepted by the people. You have to be accepted by the other countries in order to become a country, right? So that's just two schools of thought on how to become a country.
So let me pause you there. So I'm following your thread of thought. You're saying that before this convention, you could just march into people's lawns, politely ask for their loan. If they say no, you shoot them, and then you've conquered them. And then we have this convention almost 100 years old, or just north of 100 years. And then now we have these rules that says you have to have this, you have to have this. And this is all in a bid to restore order. Right?
Yeah.
How many countries have actually won sovereignty in this civilized manner without really shooting each other? Has that really happened in the history that we can reference?
That's the point again. Well, from what I could see, most of the countries have had some sort of bloodshed, right, to succeed, right. So if we define succeed as a group or a
breakaway group
breaks away from the existing country, then the record is terrible.
Oh no, I mean Soviet Union.
No, it's terrible, right? Because most of them have had to have some serious war in order to be recognized as a country. Here in Africa, we got examples like Algeria breaking away from France, right? Because before then, Algeria was what's seen as a province of France, right? Which means when they were trying to become an independent state, France is like, we are OP, come back here, right? Well, and they had to have a serious battle in order to get out. One that was full of bloodshed. It was just messy.
I want us to actually go one step ahead and back, because the history of African countries gaining independence is a complex issue in the idea of actually breaking out from the country. So I want us to go to Europe, because Europe, I hate civilized. They might be watching civilized. There's a lot of countries. I mean, one particular example. One World Cup I watched, there was Yugoslavia playing. The next World Cup, there's Croatia. The next World Cup, there's Montenegro. And this whole thing keeps breaking apart. And so, what happens there? Because colonization is another issue which will come into from an African point of view. What examples do we have really of countries seceding peacefully, right? And really sitting there looking at the international law of sovereignty, going through the process, and then all shaking hands and be like, "All right, mate."
I think there it's when an empire collapses.
Okay.
So what happens is an empire overreaches. When it collapses and is no longer administrative government over these regions, then the different areas then collect themselves into a national identity in the country. So you can almost say it's without bloodshed, because what makes it collapse is not necessarily war upon itself. But when the empire collapses, then
there would have had been war before that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So it has happened without bloodshed, but it's normally from an empire collapsing. Right.
So if Cape Town were to really go through this process, obviously thinking about the constitution of the country, they'd have to.
So only Cape Town, it's the whole Western Cape.
Okay, excuse my bad, ignorance. I get you know.
Claudia is like, hey, just leave Cape Town and its naughty corner. All right. Don't cut us off, please.
Look, it's a strategic resource. We want to keep
Cape Town and keep the.
We want to keep the Western Cape, but they keep asking to leave. So we have to interrogate this conversation. Is it a fair comment? Because I've seen articles saying that it's a ridiculous conversation.
Yeah.
But if it keeps coming up every 2 years, we can't just ignore it, because we know the history says when people really want to leave or self-actualize or secede, eventually becomes violent, right? And so we have to wonder whether even the kind of violence we see in some parts of Western Cape, whether it's not deeply rooted with the idea that actually we don't belong. So I'm not saying we don't, and I love the Western Cape, I want to keep it, but I'm just like, what? How do countries actually become countries, right?
Okay.
So there's There's a perhaps peaceful, funny case in Australia. You're telling me about it in your insomnia case. And I think the funny thing that it lasted for 50 years.
So what you're referring to is what's known as micronations. So micronations are not, sovereign states in the ultimate sense of sovereign states. So this is what happened in Australia. This man had quotas in terms of what he's supposed to produce in his farm, because back then Australian government would set quotas for the farmers. This is what you produce. He was unhappy with those quotas, and he decided, no, I'm leaving Australia. Like funny thought, I'm leaving Australia.
And then at that time he does not even have a tractor to leave. You're like, how? It's like, this is a new country.
So in 1970, what he then did is that he declared himself and his farm a independent state. Right. So when you declare yourself an independent state, now you are on your way to being a sovereign state. Right. So the reason why we call these micronations, and there's quite a few of them in the world, is that they don't meet the three conditions to be a country. Because to be a country, you need what? You need a government. You need
permanent
residents,
population,
yeah, and then you need a geographic area.
Yeah.
So he only has a geographic area and he declares himself a state, which means he's very dependent on the government for everything else.
No, but you also need recognition.
Yes.
Of your peers, which are other countries. Because remember, you get all those three, you don't get recognized. You're still not a country. Yeah. No one is taking you seriously. You're a farm. Kind of like what is happening with Orania.
Remember that part there we said is part of that Montevideo Convention.
Yeah.
Right? One of the things they declare there, I think it was Article 3, it says statehood is independent of recognition by other states. So you can be sovereign even without recognition by other states, as long as you meet these three things.
Oh, okay.
But it's useless because now you need to trade with those states. You need them to accept your passports. You need them to accept your driver's license.
But here's the key thing that we haven't mentioned in what is mentioned in sovereignty.
Yeah.
You have to not be dependent on another state, wholly dependent, and which is where the big challenges are, right? You have to be able to stand on your own in every way. So that dependency factor is key, because then it means there has to be a recognition of independence by others. And so the questions are always there. To what extent is Lesotho dependent on South Africa? To what extent is Swaziland dependent on South Africa and perhaps Mozambique? To what extent, is countries like what is this funny arrangement with America and Puerto Rico? What is happening there, right? And is Puerto Rico a sovereign state? Is it part of America? What is happening there? So that becomes a sticking point. Yeah. Because honestly, this is a challenge.
That's why you end up having so many classifications of what a nation or a state is, because people start using the word puppet state. When you as it steps away from that. So to finish the micronation, right? So micronations generally are not recognized as sovereign states.
Okay.
They have a geographical land, but they're missing a governing body. They're missing recognition from other countries. So their passports are not recognized. You can't travel on their passports. You can't use their money outside of that place where they're in, and that's a micronation.
So what I'm hearing is that you can be a nation, but you're not a country.
Yes.
Okay.
So
right.
This is
in my house we can declare ourselves a nation.
Yes.
But we're just not a country.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think that's what I'm going to tell my kids. We're a nation.
This is exactly the same kind of mindset that Orania is applying. So it's worse. They even call it an enclave there. It's not only a micronation, but it's an enclave, because they've now produced their own currency. They now produce their own passport. Though these are not recognized outside of the country, and the way it is now, it's registered as a company. Right, so the whole area of Orania is owned by a company. You buy shares into this company, and then that's how you buy land into it. You don't actually buy land; you buy shares. Right?
It's quite progressive in one way or the other. It's just because of what they stand for, I wouldn't basha them. But if they were like serious people, I was gonna be like, you guys are onto something.
Okay, so this is different. Micronations are different from unrecognized states.
Okay. Let's talk about unrecognized states, right? And let's come specifically to Africa, right? There's two very peculiar examples, right? You've got the Sahara Republic, which is tussling with Morocco around Western Sahara.
Yes.
Right? And a lot of commentary saying that it's the last colony of Africa because that war has been raging. Western Sahara has been an issue. And the interesting thing is that the AU or the OAU before, right, recognized them, or they've had a permanent seat since 1984. One of the big proponents of that was South Africa. South Africa has been a serious ally of the Sahara Republic to a point where this year they were exchanging some serious, tense diplomatic conversation with Morocco, right? Who is the other party on the other side. But yet, the Sahara Republic is recognized as a country in the African Union. It is, however, not recognized as a country in the UN, which is interesting. On the other side, you've got Somaliland, stable region in Somalia. In fact, more stable than the rest of Somalia, some people claim. It's met all the legal requirements of sovereignty, yet
except one.
No country recognizes it in the entire world, which is the one that they have not met. Because from my view, it should be allowed to be a country if sovereignty was a matter of law. But what I'm seeing is that sovereignty is a matter of politics.
Yes. Okay. So you are right in the case of Somaliland, right? It sits right there in Somalia, what we call Somalia, and it meets three requirements. There's a region, and this region is the territory, right? There is a permanent population, right? And then they have their own government, their own tender, it's a full country.
No, it's a full country, it's easy, accessible, it's got airports, it's got flights there. So, I mean, good passport, good Mali, and all those things.
So the only challenge there is recognition. No one wants to recognize.
Which goes back to politics.
Right. True. And a little bit of this politics comes from the last 2 times that a country was looking like it's going through a peaceful secession, but that turned bloody violent, right? The first one is if you remember what happened in Darfur before South Sudan ever came by, there was a secession or an attempted secession by a small group in Sudan. It was called Darfur, That turned into horror. Like it was a never-ending war. There was chemical weapons being used, and everyone who had backed Darfur now kind of felt like, oh shucks, should we get involved now because we recognize this
country? Then again, you say that's politics.
Yes.
Because Somaliland has met the legal requirement for statehood. Why are they not getting it? Because of politics. What are the politics? Somalia realizes that if they let Somaliland go, all the other regions are going to want to secede. True. And that's going to be a problem in Mogadishu. So
not only all the other regions, but the countries around Somaliland, right, have had secession. Ethiopia had Eritrea move away from Ethiopia in a bloody conflict.
That's the fault of the Italians. The history's there, guys. Don't think I'm blaming you as Italians. The history's there. It's the fault of the Italians. Eritrea was chilling. In fact, Eritrea and Ethiopia were fine. The Italians came and they messed it up. Now they had a 30-year-old war.
Let's finish this. So the countries around Somaliland, you've got Ethiopia, and it remembers that, right? You got Sudan, which is the other neighbor, right? And it remembers a time when they had Darfur and South Sudan break off from there. So that whole region is just a bit sketchy and nervous, and until they can support Somaliland, do you think someone from outside there is going to say, okay, we are for you?
Well, here's the thing, the reality then. The reality. Because we'll go back to say, yesterday when I posted about this, there was one of my Facebook friends who said, look, the rules of how you become sovereign are clear. Here's international law, here's a thesis, and she was really positioning it as it's just a legal requirement, meet the legal requirement, and let's go. Okay. And I was trying to get to a point where, is it really a legal requirement? Can a country ever succeed without war? Do we have examples of that? Someone in my stream said, well, when you look at constitutionalism and the process, the referendum, it's the same that happened to Brexit. I'm like, but is it really the same? Because Brexit is not breaking out from the EU as a country.
Yeah.
It was a member state was participating, and they said, guys, and could the EU say no? No, they can't. They are sovereign states to begin with. So the question I really have is that the only thing, is it fair to say the only thing that is standing between Somaliland and Somalia
Is war.
is war? And we all don't want that. But could we have enough political appetite to say, right, this is how we handle it?
This is what frustrates me with the law, right? At any second, you would have someone from the legal fraternity who's able to step in and tell you quite outright what's required by law, right? But there isn't, in this case, an international body that is there representing the entire international community where you apply and say, okay, I've met the requirements, please make me a country now. Because there's no body like that, it's up to each country to recognize one by one as Somaliland approaches. And then they've got relations with various countries. Now they worry, if I say yes, how do I ruin these relations? If I say no, how do I ruin these relations? So they just don't make a decision until they have to. Right?
And that time, you're sitting in limbo, right?
Yep.
You've self-actualized. You've fought a good fight. You've proven everything that you need to be a country, but you're in limbo because actually the problem here is diplomacy. And somehow, when we discuss sovereignty, diplomacy and politics are not the first line. Because what it should say is that before you want to be a country, you need to win the diplomatic and the political battle.
There's one exception, right?
Okay, give me an exception.
Start a war and win it.
Well, I mean, we're in 2020, we're civilized now. We don't just kill people.
I'm serious. That Somalia is in trouble. Like the other region, right?
Yeah.
Governmental wise, many groups, it's in trouble, right?
It's tough.
The only way Somalia can do this quickly
guys, you see
is
me,
to start a war.
You see me wiping. I was in Mogadishu. Good
right.
All right.
So let's close this off here. So how do we end this? Is there a way to succeed for Western Cape succeed?
Well, I mean, let's look at what's happened in Western Sahara, right? Everything is there. They've even got recognition from so many countries, from Asia to Africa to the Americas and everything, but yet they still don't have hold of Western Sahara because fundamentally Morocco must agree. And if Morocco does not agree, that continues hanging. Same with Somaliland. If Somalia never agrees...
I think it was the case of the UN. So the UN hasn't added them as
no,
doesn't recognize them.
But the recognition is on the basis of whether... if Morocco wakes up today and says, okay, we'll recognize Sahara Republic, the UN will move suit. Because a lot of African countries have fallen behind Sahara Republic being a sovereign state. South Africa being one that champions that. The Somaliland issue is the same. If Somalia says, hey, okay, we'll recognize you, then the entire world will recognize them. Good. By the way, Somaliland is trading. Who is it trading with if it's not recognized? So there's clearly underhand tactics happening here. So when you look at the Western Cape and you look at the constitution and you look at the interest of the country and you look at the government and everything, one friend of mine on my stream yesterday says it's near impossible that they can get a secession, right? Because they have to convince Parliament to agree to a referendum if they want to go the peaceful route. And if you look at the strategic position of the Western Cape from a trade route point of view, if you look at the amount of GDP, I mean, it's 460 something billion last year. The government is not going to be like, no, sharp, you can go. They're not going to get it, right? So it's very difficult to see a Western Cape seceding from South Africa. But I think what is a continuous conversation is, if this conversation keeps coming up, how do we manage this as a country? Because war does not start overnight. It titters for years and years and years when you think nothing is happening, and then something just blows up.
That's true.
And the next thing you know, you've got a mess in your hands, which you could have maybe diplomatically dealt with 15 years ago.
So as a final sentence, success in the pipeline, no success. What do you say?
Well, not as long as I'm alive. After I'm dead, I don't know what's going to happen. You're not going to get it. Yeah.
All right. So there we have it. That's how countries are formed. Remember, there's 3 things required. It needs to have its own territory, a permanent population, and a government. Not only that, but it must have recognition from its peers that confer sovereignty on it. right? In the case of the Western Cape, we have serious doubts that they could manage all this in a very short space of time. Maybe after many generations, it may be possible, but as of right now, they lack the three things to become a sovereign state. Join us next time when we tackle more questions and things that are burning in our mind. And we'd like to say thank you to everyone that made a comment or asked questions. We will be better in the future with answering those questions. Until next time.
Sure. We'll answer them in the comments. Cheers.
How do you stop this? I told you too old for this thing.
I mean, yeah, we need to get like...
But seriously, how do you stop this thing?
Get a 15-year-old to come and say, oh, that's finish.
Where do you see finish?
I don't know. There was finish on mine. There's finish in
Where?
the corner.
Oh,
in the corner, yeah.